2010 on Massey Energy, the coal company. And the Upper Big Branch disaster happened in April 2010. And I was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal here in Pittsburgh. So that whole accident really got me involved in reporting on Massey and reporting in West Virginia. And so I went down there for the accident in April, where, turned out there were 29 miners who died in that accident. So I was there with national and international media kind of during this vigil to see if any of the miners had survived, and they hadn't. And I remember one day I was on a phone call with somebody about an environmental case situation in West Virginia. And just at the end of the call, he mentioned that, you're reporting on Massey, you should check out this lawsuit down in Mingo County. There's a lawyer down there, he's suing on behalf of about 700 people for a water contamination case. It piqued my interest right away. And so I drove down to Mingo County, which is about 90 miles south of Charleston, West Virginia. It's right on the border with Kentucky, the southernmost county there. And, I met this environmental lawyer, Kevin Thompson, who was working out of the Mountaineer Hotel in Williamson. And he had this just kind of crazy makeshift office with wood paneling and a dark side of the moon poster on the wall and all kinds of mind maps and things. He just kind of captivated me by telling me the whole story of the lawsuit. And one thing that really got me in that moment was he was sitting back in his desk, pointed through the window across from his desk, and he said, see those lights on the top of the mountain? That's Don Blankenship's house. And so when the lights were on, he said, I know that he might be there entertaining people. It was this corporate retreat on top of the mountain. And so just something about that juxtaposition of this lawyer working out of this old hotel against this company, Massey Energy, which was the biggest coal company in Appalachia. Kevin Thompson at the time told me about his clients and what, the water they've been living with. And then I eventually met them, and they told me, that they had this black water, this toxic water coming right out of their taps in their kitchens and bathtubs. And, it just was remarkable what they lived with for years, beginning in the 1980s for some people. And then in the early 2000s, they met Kevin Thompson, and he sued the company in 2004. So it was just a combination really of these compelling figures: Kevin Thompson, the lawyer, Don Blankenship, the CEO. But then in the middle of that, you had all these literally hundreds of people. And I really got to meet dozens of them and just heard their stories of what they lived through with their water. Not only having their house smell of hydrogen sulfide and, having their kids get rashes and people getting kidney stones and cancer, but also just, their whole lives really being upended by this for years and years. What surprised me most of all, perhaps, was just how hard it is to write a book. So I have been a reporter for the Wall Street Journal since 2005 here in Pittsburgh, and just conceiving of a book-length project was a really difficult task for me, to be totally honest about this. But also just structuring the story that would be, hopefully would pull the reader along and be gripping and interesting. It's 7 years of litigation involving 700 clients. You've got Kevin Thompson on one side with all the people he worked with, various lawyers and his crew, his staff, working out of that hotel. And then on the other side, you've got Don Blankenship and Massey Energy. And I really wanted to tell more of the corporate story and also more of Don Blankenship's life. I kind of wanted to profile Kevin Thompson and Don Blankenship. Right from the beginning, I did not want this story to be about a good guy versus a bad guy. The people that Kevin Thompson represented had very complicated feelings about him by the end of the story because of how things turned out, despite everything that he put into the case, to the point of going basically personally bankrupt several times and feeling like he was risking his marriage and his finances, even his health at some points. But the people also had very complex feelings about Don Blankenship, the CEO of Massey Energy, and even people who had blamed him for their water being contaminated still had some positive things to say about him and his commitment to Mingo County and the area. It was that kind of complexity that I really wanted to bring out in this story. It goes to the question of how close do you become to the people you're writing about. And I spent many hours with people in their kitchens and their porches and talking to them and hearing their entire life stories. In some cases it would get very emotional when they spoke about how the water had affected them, particularly their health. It's something I saw with Kevin Thompson and the people too. He almost became a member of people's family in a sense, like an extended member. He could come over their house anytime, use the phone, um, get some food, a dinner, especially when he was running out of money. This man named James Berlin Anderson, he was a coal miner, and he had grown up in the water, which was the expression people used when they were kids, and they'd get these sores and things that they just thought were expected. I went to interview him another time. This is around 2017, and I drove up and I saw him on the porch, and he just looked gray. He looked like kind of ashen. And he told me that he had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and he had a few months to live. But we ended up talking that whole afternoon, and it was a good day for him. He was really in good spirits and he wasn't feeling much pain. And so he told me a lot about his life and how he was prepared to die and how he had picked out his coffin, which he described as a Cadillac. When it comes to taking care of myself, I think I would say for me, that's just, telling the story, receiving someone's story is so cathartic and healing that I'm just grateful for those interactions, really. And to be able to tell their story. I would say my heroes in this story are for sure the people who persevered for years. They went through this lawsuit for 7 years to try to get clean drinking water and to try to win some justice against the coal company. Uh, and so, for everything they went through and for never giving up, I would really admire that in them. I'm drawn to write about fascinating characters, and I found them in Kevin Thompson and Don Blankenship both. And it's interesting that each of them would be considered heroes by some people. It's interesting our perception of what we think of as a hero or an anti-hero or an imperfect hero. I did have the opportunity to spend time with Don Blankenship too, and drive through his hometown where he grew up and go to his house, which is right in these communities that had had the contaminated water. And it was fascinating to see people come up to him and thank him directly for the jobs they'd had for years. My heroes, my literary heroes, probably too many to name, but I do admire a lot of people, try to emulate them, and people like maybe Susan Orlean, people who have such distinctive voice. Michael Lewis, he's another favorite of mine. Just people who are just great storytellers. I really did want to look at the history of Massey Energy, and I ended up talking to E. Morgan Massey, the grandson of the founder. I wanted to show that whole arc of this company that had started out really small in Virginia and then become this multi-billion-dollar coal company, one of the biggest in the country. There seemed to be this disconnect between the executives at the company who are, I think perfectly well-meaning and wanting to extract coal and sell it in a safe and responsible way. People with degrees in engineering who spent hours coming up with plans and to do this thing safely. They hire consulting companies to do this, and but possibly a disconnect between those ambitions, those goals, and then what happens on the ground when it actually comes to taking the coal out of the ground, cleaning the coal, and trying to store it. What happens when you're working under pressure to just produce thousands of tons of coal, and process them and ship them. And then also the culture that develops at the company. To me, it was fascinating that when E. Morgan Massey and the family was running Massey Energy, they had one style of management. It was very decentralized. E. Morgan Massey ran the company, but he gave the heads of all the subsidiaries extensive control over their group of companies, usually a collection of mines, a processing plant, and the transportation. And when Don Blankenship came along, he sort of succeeded by doing the opposite. He succeeded by being extremely hands-on, micromanaging, not listening to management in some very key moments, being such an effective uh, manager in terms of production and, eventually profitability. The company did struggle with that. One thing that was fascinating to me too about this whole uh, kind of dynamic between Kevin Thompson, the environmental lawyer, and Don Blankenship, the coal CEO, was that Kevin actually admired things, even though he had been put through so much by through his lawsuit against Massey, gone bankrupt several times, and just been struggling for 7 years. He admired Blankenship's long-term focus, not always meeting a quarterly goal, and also his dedication to the region. Don Blankenship didn't move to Richmond or St. Louis or somewhere else. He lived right in the communities, and he would just hop on a helicopter to go visit a mine. Sometimes on the weekends. Creating the culture is definitely a double-edged sword. I think what gives me hope about this story is that the people did persevere for 7 years. They they did win a measure of justice. They went through an awful lot. Not only are they fighting the biggest coal company in Appalachia in the coal fields of West Virginia, in the home basically county of Don Blankenship, but they're also doing so in a court system that has been criticized for being corrupt. In this book, I really tried to get into the history of the county and the history of coal mining. And I think when I take that longer view and I see what people struggled against in the late 19th century, early 20th century, I try to talk about how that was an economic struggle as well, because the railroad and coal mining and industrialization was all coming in at that time. So that was sort of a fight over capital. In the 1920s, you had a fight over labor when the union was trying to organize right in the same area. And then during this fight, it's over people's health and the environment. So there are these cycles of struggle between the people living there and the industry. Uh, and I think in this case, they really were able to be heard through the judicial system. And then, my hope is that through writing this book, they're going to be heard again, even more widely. The people actually refer to themselves as the forgotten communities. They were not able to get help from the state, from the company, from local officials, and they hired Kevin Thompson, the environmental lawyer, and eventually they did get clean drinking water, which is, you know, by far the greatest success that they got, from what people told me. My hope is that readers will be able to read this book and sort of get a longer view of the coal industry and what it is to live in Appalachia from the perspective of people who do live there and what they struggle through this lawsuit, and what their parents and grandparents went through with the coal industry in earlier times. Was the court system slanted one way or the other? Did they get a fair shake with the judge? The thing that's really interesting to me about that is that Kevin Thompson, the lawyer, he always had faith in the judge in Mingo County. He always believed the judge was sort of on his side in a way. The judge was ruling in favor of Kevin and his clients. Um, but then it seemed that the judge, this is all Kevin's perspective, that the judge, something had changed. He seemed to be making different kind of rulings. And then, Kevin faced the choice about whether or not he should recuse the judge. Some people, through my reporting, I'd say they said that, things were slanted against them. They thought in the end the judge would side with the coal company because that's been their experience. The people were, let's say, they were not satisfied with how the case played out. And one thing about that is that they wanted, you know, everyone wanted their story to be told. They wanted their story to be told in an open courtroom and to let a jury decide. And people were getting older and older, and it was clear that some people might not be, they just simply might not live long enough to see the end of that process. So uh, that's also a moving part of the story when that is sort of taken away from the people, the chance to be in a courtroom. Some people's willingness to talk to me was so that the story could be told. It didn't make it to a jury where it would have been reported on in the news in the state, and it would have been aired openly. This book hopefully is an opportunity for that to happen, for their stories to be told more fully.